Neurodivergent employees, Neuroinclusion at work. Our group of panelists is really excited to have this conversation, especially in the context of currently this year, where the national conversation on autism and on neurodivergence have been really elevated. And it's a more important time than ever for us to be listening deeply to the voices of neurodivergent individuals and their lived experiences, and especially those in the workplace. So we are so excited to be speaking to you all today about this. The format of our session is that we are going to each introduce ourselves. We have 6 speakers today. We're all going to talk about different topics for about 5 minutes each. And then we're going to try to do a Q&A if we're able to. We're a little short on time, but please feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and we will do our best to address them or to discuss them at the end of the panel. So without further ado, I want to welcome my other panelists that are here. We're each going to introduce ourselves and share a visual description of ourselves today as well. So first, I'll welcome Ben.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name's Ben Van Hook. I'm an autistic self-advocate and master's student at George Mason University, and I currently work as a community support coordinator at the Organization for Autism Research. I am an Asian person with black hair. I'm also wearing a green sweatshirt, so that's my visual description. So I'll pass it off to Ray.
All right. So I'm Ray McCoy here, hailing from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I identify as a he, him, African American male, and my job is working with the state of Minnesota through a new innovative program called the Employer Reasonable Accommodation Fund, which I'll talk a little bit more about here. But what we do is that we help small businesses ultimately be able to support their workforce with disabilities by providing them funding ultimately for reasonable accommodations. And so let's see who else we got here. I'll pass it on to Sydney.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney Elaine Butler. I'm the founder of Accessible Crates. My pronouns are they/them. And at Accessible Crates, we also offer coaching and consulting to really make sure that your workplace is more inclusive and accessible. And I actually have a virtual background that looks like kind of like a business co-working space. I have black headphones on. I'm wearing glasses. I'm a biracial individual, and I'm also wearing a gray vest. I will pass it on to Larissa.
I'm Larissa Minner. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a white woman with dark hair, purple highlights, wearing blue glasses, and there's a purple background with a unicorn with sunglasses and a tie. I'm a neurodivergent researcher, speaker, and trainer, and I'm the director of the Leading Inclusion Together, a research hub and study coordinator for University of Texas at Austin, Texas Center for Disability Studies. And I'll pass it on to Tiffany.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Tiffany Jamison. I am the founder of Grit and Flow. I have brown hair. I have light skin. I'm wearing round glasses, and my background is blue with a Grit and Flow orange logo, which is a labyrinth in a circle. I also am wearing a green tank top type shirt. My work involves around consulting with employers to change their internal practices to be more inclusive. So it's neuro-inclusive, but we really focus on more of a person-centered approach. So it helps everybody, and it's less of an initiative for us. I'm also a research practitioner working on learning more about how we can really make substantial change. I'll pass it to Jessica.
Thank you. I'm Jessica Lee. I'm co-founder and executive director of Neuro Talent Works. We partner to provide companies training on neurodiversity and how to build workplaces that embrace every type of mind, and to connect employers to a neurodiverse talent pool. I'm an Asian American woman. I'm wearing a black top today, and I'm in a blurred background at a hotel, traveling for work this week. So thank you all so much again for being here and to meet our panelists. So each panelist is going to speak on one of these topics. And then again, please drop your questions for us in the chat. So we'll start with Ben. We're going to just level set here first with an understanding of neurodiversity and how do we have a balanced lens in dismantling how neurodivergence is perceived and discussed. There's an important saying in the community, nothing about us without us. And Ben's going to share with us like how we can extend this into research and how we should understand and talk about this.
Yeah, thank you so much. So before talking about neuro-inclusive workplace practices, we must also begin to examine and evaluate the research that these practices stem from. Much of what we know about disability comes from research, but so often the inherent biases and flaws within these studies aren't really addressed. And a lot of these studies are biased because they come from neuronormative coding and ableist rhetoric within the studies. And as a result, the information that employers receive and use to implement different policies might be based off of ableist coding and interpretation of the data, which can further cause harm and stigma to the autistic and greater neurodivergent community. And this can spread falsehoods, false narratives to supervisors, to managers, to CEOs, etc., about neurodiversity and our capabilities as neurodivergent employees. Research conducted by non-disabled individuals can be very harmful. And a recent example of this is a researcher called Suzanne O'Sullivan, who's a neurologist at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery, who recently claimed that extra time is not helpful and sets neurodivergent people up for failure. She goes on to say that society should be looking into autism interventions as opposed to accommodations. And she goes on to write that you're setting up an idea that the world will always accommodate them. We really need to look at what we're doing when we identify children with problems. And by calling neurodivergent people with problems, O'Sullivan stigmatizes the neurodivergent community and spreads disinformation that could influence how employers and educators perceive of and treat us. In another quote, she writes, "We should be helping them to work within a messy, difficult world, not setting them up to believe that the world will change to accommodate them." And by using this inflammatory rhetoric, she gives organizations a free pass to not provide accommodations or support, but instead shift the blame and burden on the neurodivergent individual to find a way to exist in a role that may be fundamentally incompatible with their way of existing. And examples like this are very important to bring up because it can influence the perception of disability and how the research can be inherently ableist or oppressive, thus providing guidance to employers and other stakeholders that could actively harm the disability community. And community-based participatory research, or CBPR, can counteract these harmful studies and rhetoric because they just focus on bringing in neurodivergent people into the research. Much of disability research is centered around studies conducted by non-disabled individuals and use a non-disabled lens. And this leaves out a critical voice and component to autism research, and that is the neurodivergent individual themselves. Nothing about us, as discussed before, extends to research, but unfortunately there are so many studies that don't utilize the neurodivergent community. And this can lead to ableism, ableist beliefs, different biases, and different stereotypes seeping into the studies that are used to inform disability policy. Throughout my experience in coding and screening, I've seen so many studies within the past 5 to 10 years that still refer to our community as the R word, or use words like impairment or deficit sin or poor at to describe our community, thus creating a wholly unrepresentative or inaccurate portrayal of our population. And this is harmful because ableist research can lead to ableist policies years down the line. And when neurodivergent individuals are not used in research to guide different studies, harmful conclusions, such as Tylenol causing autism or vaccines causing autism, can arise. And rhetoric such as this describing our community using the R word or spreading these falsehoods can misinform and misguide different employers as to how they can best support our population. It's also important to recognize that much of the literature on autism was conducted by privileged, college-educated, cis, white, non-disabled males, thus greatly biasing the findings, conclusions, and results, which can provide employers an inaccurate representation of neurodiversity. And as such, it's important to include neurodivergent people in research, especially multiple marginalized individuals, to better provide a more accurate representation of disability. And it can be very harmful if the neuromajority rather serves as a judge, jury, and executioner for neurodivergent people. When the neuromajority seeks to define a community they are unable to understand or step into the shoes of, it leads to stereotypes and stigmas arising. And to create more neuroinclusive practices, it's first really important to create research and draw that research from the community itself.
Thank you so
And
much.
I'll pass it on because I'm a bit out of time.
Yeah, thank you for being mindful of that. You've highlighted such important things here, and I'll recap this for all of us as when we wrap up. I'm going to hand over now to Ray, who's going to share with us about many of the common challenges that neurodivergent individuals face. And you've both, I think, are going to be bringing up these misunderstandings that happen, and from those falsehoods that people might have. Between managers, coworkers, and neurodivergent employees. So I'll hand to you, Ray.
All right, thank you. So, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach, but first I want to acknowledge, Ben, what you said, and you'll know why in a minute, really touched me on a personal level. And it did because, a lot of the things you're saying, I've personally experienced, which is going to be a segue into what I'm talking about. So, me myself, in addition to doing the work that I'm doing, I also have, am neurodivergent. It's been something that has, been, I mean, a challenge for me in my career, being in the workforce for over 20 some years. And as somebody who has this, AUDHD, I've been capable of, doing jobs, but yet found myself quietly existing in them. So, when I look back over, the biggest roadblock wasn't lack of skill, but lack of skill in terms of doing the work, but social skills. So, I could complete tasks, navigate workplace norms, but navigating the workforce or the workplace norms, like unspoken expectations, or communication routines, a lot of times have drained my confidence and motivation and really caused a major misunderstanding. And looking at a little bit of research from some of the links I found, one study showed that this is far from unique. For example, 37% of people do not disclose their condition or even ask for help because of the stigma, you know, and I'm part of that 37% where, up until now, I've always been too scared to ask for accommodations because, we don't want to, be seen as a liability. We want to be able to be like anyone else in the workplace, which is why, you know, I love the work I do now, and I'm really a champion for reasonable accommodations. Because when managers interpret differences, in communication focus, sensory response or interaction style as a lack of motivation, quote unquote, poor performance or a wrong fit, misunderstandings flourish. So, a lot of times, like, I don't know if anybody else can um relate to this, but a lot of times, neurodivergent individuals like myself, we mask these traits in order to be accepted, which can be exhausting. And which, for me, I could say at times, like, I've experienced a dip in confidence as well as disengagement. Going to my current role, with the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development and leading this new, innovative program, the Employer Reasonable Accommodation Fund, you know, you see up close and personal how accommodations don't just help others, but they help me recognize, that people like us are not the problem, you know, but the environment rather is. This fund was here to support or is here to support small to mid-sized businesses in Minnesota, you know, to order to make adjustments so employees like myself would show up as their full selves and not just some diluted version. And when managers are missing strategies like clear structure, quiet workspace, communication norms, or opportunity for self-advocacy, then even highly skilled neurodivergent employees can slip through the cracks, right? And research has shown many times that neurodiverse workers represent a talent pool rich in innovation and creativity. You see it all the time, like, and I could name, like, several people who have, like, really changed the game for all of us who are, one way or another neurodivergent, but they're often trapped within environments that value conformity over divergence. And the shift comes when managers and teams stop viewing neurodivergence as an anomaly and start, you know, designing, for a difference, something that could fit others. So this means, assuming communication styles must vary, factoring in sensory load, offering informal and formal ways to request support, and then acting on what people say. Because yes, the person knows their needs. The role of leadership is to listen and respond. So, that's pretty much like the old some of it. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I could go talk about this all day, but I want us to explore a few things here in closing. So, like, how everyday misunderstandings form and compound, why social norms and mistaken and masking create hidden work and individual burnout, right? And how we can move from just surviving to self-advocating, from fitting in to excelling. Something I've always felt like and see now more than ever that, something that I could do would really, really, change the game. Because one thing about myself, not to always bring that back to me, and I'm sure with actually all of you that are on this call, we're trying to help other people who have been in the same situation as us because we don't want to see them go through that. So, we want to make sure that the workplaces, are designing an environment for togetherness, differences, and not despite, so that it's a win-win for everybody.
Yes, thank you so much, Ray. The win-win, I think, is really important. And what you're saying, one of the neurodiversity leads at IBM, she has a great quote that says, neurodivergent individuals, we're not broken. We're not needing to be fixed. And that when we're looking at the workplace, we need to look at strengths. We need to look at the environment. And the question that we ask is, how can I help you succeed? Not what accommodations do you need? And so I'm going to hand over to Sydney, who's going to jump right into that for us of those accommodations. And we don't want people to be masking. We also have challenges that need to be addressed. So the balance that's there. So Sydney, I'll hand to you on how do we create these safe spaces? How do we offer support without pressure?
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And thank you both, Ben and Ray, for those insightful points that you made. And so the working environment should really foster an inclusive culture, moving beyond just accommodations and really offering support and encouraging and empowering self-advocacy. So where we as neurodivergent feels like we can actually ask for support and if need accommodation without having to disclose our condition. And so to really create safe spaces and environments, it should focus on our individual needs as they show up instead of our conditions. I think a lot of times organizations are still looking at, they want that label, they want the diagnosis, but it's like, how can you really meet someone and meet them where they're at and understanding the individual needs for working on a new task at work, working on a task that the previous worked on, but now having some difficulty with, and really just meeting people where they're at. And instead not thinking that there are limited accommodations that can be provided. I've worked with a couple of organizations that like, oh, well, we offer this accommodation, but they didn't want it. The individual didn't want it. And it's like, well, did you try it out with them? Did they have another thing in mind? And so a lot of times there's the previous perception of, oh, I accommodated one autistic individual or another neurodivergent individual in the workplace. This must be the only accommodation that should be provided. But the lived experience of neurodivergent individuals is diverse as non-neurodivergent individuals, right? And so really looking at understanding, also encouraging informal and formal ways of providing accommodation and providing support. And so sometimes a person may need more support and need to have more regular check-ins or have, need more access to tools and resources to be better and to feel like they're more confident in their job. right? And that can be very informal. And there's formalized accommodations as well, but that should also not. A lot of times people think it requires that disclosure and having to disclose that what I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis and what my condition is. But that's not the case. And so also taking people at face value. I think a lot of times people don't take us at face value, and it's so frustrating because like Ray was mentioning the masking piece. We mask our struggles and we don't want to be seen as a burden, right? And so a lot of times we just mask our symptoms, we mask what we have to do, and we are so used to accommodating for ourselves or showing up in the world that doesn't always accommodate for us. And it's exhausting and it's frustrating, and it can have other repercussions such as burnout that was mentioned previously. And so I really encourage to take what we say at face value, provide the tools, resources, and really work with us instead of just trying to provide a band-aid solution that you think might work or worked previously, but really working with us to see what's working and having those continuous check-ins to see, is this accommodation or the support still working? Is everything okay? And having these ongoing conversations and having these conversations is so vital. It's so simple, yet so overlooked in the workplace. And so really as the manager of human resources, really working with us as the employee, right, to really come up with solutions that will really make an impact. And so at a previous employer I had, I actually asked for an accommodation, and I was actually working in this environment. I was working with adults that have disabilities. It was a day program. And it was a day program, and I disclosed that I needed accommodation and then had to disclose that I was autistic, and it actually backfired on me. And I was told I was lazy, and it actually ended up spreading to my coworkers, and I was absolutely mortified, right? I was finally comfortable in myself and actually disclosing, and then it backfired. And that's sadly the reality of so many of us. And so then my coworkers continued to say I was lazy, I didn't want to work there anymore. It was doing too much. And so this created a non-inclusive environment for me, and so really recognizing that this made it hard for me to ask for future accommodations in my future roles. And I studied human resources at school and was learning about accommodation, and that's why I felt ready to actually ask for this accommodation now in that workplace. But then it, backfired. And so even though I know that I have a right to be accommodated, I didn't feel like I had the right to be accommodated and that I was going to be discriminated against. And so I really wish when I told my manager that I needed accommodation that they really took what I said at face value. They believed me, and it also kept it confidential. And confidentiality is vital. We deserve to be supported and accommodated without being outed if we don't want to share our condition or share our struggles with other folks in the organization. And so what really worked, and I wish they came up to me and worked with me to come up with accommodation strategies. And so like a lot of times, again, employers or managers or human resources just offer choices, but don't really ask us to choose what we want, how to be supported, and really working together to come up with a mutual solution. And so there's so many range of accommodations that we might need, and really understanding it can vary from like having different communication preferences, needing communication to be written instead of in a voice note. I had that at the previous employer as well. I was like, can you please write it into me in an email or in a text message? And we just continue to send me voice notes. And that's actually when I came across Outer AI and other AI note takers. And now I've been using that as an accommodation. And so really looking at, what does this look like for me? What does it look like for the employee? What does it look like in actual reality? And how can we be able to understand the flexibility that someone brings their whole self to work, and that things change day to day, neurodivergent or not. And so just being patient. And so since the previous employer I have gotten accommodation from new employers, but every time I was literally so scared, even though this is one of my passion areas, knowing about accommodation. I'm so scared every time I ask because I was so it was so bad before. And so I now occasionally go into the office for some of the work I do, and I have the accommodation of having the lights adjusted for me. I'm used to working remotely. I can control my lighting situation. I usually use natural light for the most part. But then when I'm in the office, and so now they actually mostly use natural light or they reduce the lighting for me. I also ask for video calls to help me explain my task for the day. Instead, before I was getting voice notes from a previous employer, I was like, I need a video call. I want to see your face as you tell me what my expectations are and what my tasks are, my duties are for that day or that week, right? And so also having an AI note taker associated with that, so I can review it back later and be like, okay, this is exactly what I had to get done this week. I am on track. I'm a bit behind, and knowing where I am in my work. And so, and these accommodations end up leading to creating more inclusive cultures. You never know who might need an accommodation or need that support that someone asked for. Or the AI note takers, that's just good for everyone. Everyone can review the notes later and have that enabled. And so really looking at recognizing that accommodation and support and disclosure really has to also stem from a place of inclusive culture and really recognize what are we doing as an organization to make sure that we're inclusive the majority.
Thank you so much, Sydney, and thank you for just sharing so honestly with us. I hope you look at the chat because there are a lot of people who resonate with what you shared, and that's just a terrible experience that unfortunately many people have had, and which is why we're having this conversation. And so thank you for bravely sharing that with us. I want to mention something you just said about the AI note taking. And as you're explaining that, having the written notes are what are helpful for you to be able to read and to access. And when you have an AI note taker, that's actually helpful for everybody on the team. And we tell this to companies, right? Like it's especially helpful for your neurodivergent team members. But one day when you're really stressed, you got a missed call from the doctor's office, something's going on in your personal life, and you're coming to a meeting and you're not able to perform as well as you typically do at work, you're going to be grateful those notes are there too, right? And so this is the whole concept of universal design, which Larissa's about to talk to us about, that what's necessary for some is helpful for all. And so I want to hand to Larissa, and how do we apply universal design? What is it? How do we apply it in the workplace? What does it enable? Thank you.
Thank you. And since Ray and Sydney mentioned masking, and I've had this cause burnout that has lasted years. Masking can cause burnout and mental health challenges, and it's exhausting. But universal design can help reduce that, especially when it's paired with accommodations. So I want to talk about universal design, not just for buildings, but for people. Universal design means building systems that are usable by more people from the start. Like Jessica said, and Sydney as well, not only when someone asks for help or discloses their diagnosis, since Ben, Ray, and Sydney all pointed out there is still stigma and too much focus on problems instead of needs. So you can think of universal design kind of like an example is automatic captions. They're built in, helpful for many, and no one has to ask to enable them as long as the setting is on. This matters, especially for neurodivergent folks. Again, especially because of risks like burnout that can happen. So what does this look like in action? Let's start with hiring and interviews because it's often the first point of contact and it can make or break whether someone even gets to the door. And it has definitely been not for me before. So it's important to make interviews more accessible from the start. When you're scheduling an interview, be clear and proactive. So say to everyone who's going to be there, how long it will last, give an estimate, let people know if there's a test or structured format. This also can help people know if they also need to ask for certain accommodations as well. Let candidates know they're welcome to request support. It's best practice to ask everyone if any changes are needed to the interview when you're scheduling it. If the word accommodation it can feel formal or intimidating. And because of that stigma that was mentioned, some people are hesitant. So you could ask something like, is there anything we can adjust or change to help you bring your best self to the interview? I've seen that question, and I have felt uncomfortable disclosing before the interview unless accommodations were offered. And I know not everyone has that option. And like Sydney said, everyone is unique. So some people have different needs regarding that. So a little bit about what universal design can look like in interviews. Letting candidates choose remote or in person, that's been a game changer for me. Offering moving or outdoor interviews when feasible. Some people more relaxed that way. Sharing questions in different formats, spoken, written, or visual, with alt text, sending questions in advance, or offering. So it's best to offer them to all candidates, or at least letting people know what types of questions to expect. When someone sent me the interview questions ahead of time, I went in feeling prepared instead of panicked, and then I was able to actually show what I know, which, let's be honest, it really shouldn't be rare, but it's still rare, I'm finding, even though there's improvement. Also, giving everyone a chance to revisit a tough question at the end, like if it's something that will make or break the interview, that can be very helpful to, again, all these can benefit everyone. Allowing a support person with clear expectations, that's one that I have heard people find that it's less likely to be offered as part of universal design. And again, these do not replace individual accommodations. They just create a smoother process for everyone, whether someone discloses or not. I did want to briefly add, I think it's also best practice to not use body language or eye contact to make a hiring decision, because I have been told that affected a hiring decision with me before. So I did want to mention that really quick. Eye contact was specifically mentioned. I do want to move on beyond hiring into the workplace. And again, these are just some examples of how to apply universal design for all employees. Everyone is unique. I can't emphasize that enough. Use multisensory communication. So pair words with visuals, follow spoken directions with a written recap. Some people process better by reading, some by hearing, and many need both. I need both. Use accessible fonts and alt text. Also consider spacing. Sometimes it's challenging when there's not enough spacing, but also keep in mind spacing on text in digital format, but also keep in mind screen readers. Offer captions, transcripts, and visuals, and record meetings or provide notes afterward. A note-taking app, AI was already mentioned, and I think that's really beneficial for everyone. Which brings me to my next point. Offer assistive tech or app stipends. This has been life-saving for me. There are organizations that give all employees a certain amount of money to spend on assistive tech and apps, and you don't need to disclose. And it can make sure people have access to tools like text-to-speech, speech-to-text, visual timers. That has been so helpful for me for deadlines and making sure that I am staying on task, noise reducing tools, project and task management apps, including ones that allow for like visualization or mind maps. It's also important to normalize planning tools for everyone. And Sydney did mention accommodations, and I think a lot of these, as mentioned, can be used for universal design as best practice, like giving agendas and summaries to everyone, send materials in advance, like agendas, questions, expectations. This helps with processing memory and anxiety. Also allowing time for preparation and reducing pressure. I find it helpful to be given like extra time afterwards when possible. I think it's best practice to offer, make it a safe place for employees to give their thoughts after the meeting in different formats if possible. People process information differently. I also think it's best to, when possible, let an employee know when you're going to have them speak at a meeting. I know it's not always possible, but it's best practice, and let everyone know as soon as possible when a change occurs. It seems simple, but often these things are not automatically incorporated. Also, break things down. Use color-coded checklists, but make sure the information is also in other formats so they're accessible as well. Time estimates and visual project tools are helpful, and this can reduce overwhelm. It also makes tasks more doable. Breaking a task sounds simple, breaking it down, but it changes everything for some of us. When I can see the timeline and estimated time, it feels possible instead of overwhelming me. And sometimes that can be the difference between starting and shutting down for some people. Also, normalizing quiet and focus time. Let people set a do not disturb status when possible. Don't expect instant replies. Normalize that. And normalize honoring work-life balance, respecting focus rhythms, especially in remote settings. Also, rethinking productivity. So it's not all about speed or so-called multitasking, which is overemphasized. Celebrate quality, creativity, and problem solving. Neurodivergent traits often show up in nonlinear ways. Also, be sure that promotion opportunities aren't limited to networking or socialization. I have experienced this in the past, and I felt like it excluded me, and this happens more often than not. Ease the onboarding process. So let new hires shadow others. Offer scripts or examples when possible, and just creating calm spaces. Other people today mentioned sensory friendly zones, quiet rooms, normalizing camera off time, also normalizing movement or moving around. Other last thing, language matters. So say what you mean what you say. For example, instead of being vague like ASAP, you can give a clear deadline, like please submit by Friday at 2 p.m. And also explaining why this task supports our team and should take about 30 minutes. So those are clear, and that benefits everyone because everyone knows what is expected of them. And even when I needed support, I didn't always know what to ask for or if it was safe to. So when something is built in for everyone, it takes the pressure off of having to explain why, and it reduces stigma. And again, that pressure adds up to burnout and masking. Universal design is about reducing barriers before they cause harm, and it's meant to work with accommodations as needed. And when we design for neurodivergent minds, we're building systems that work better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a great list of very easy to implement universal design practices. That was so comprehensive. I'm going to do my best to summarize it for us at the end. So thank you. You got a lot of great comments. Following that note, Tiffany, can you lead us in this, adding on to what Larissa was just sharing? How do we build neuro-inclusive teams? Yeah. And we have about 10
I'm
minutes
pretty
left. So just for
okay.
everyone to know.
I'll do my best. So I'm really humbled to be a part of this panel. I'm very touched. I've heard Sydney's story before. The research. I'm a little emotional from it all. It's just very frustrating. But I'm going to talk about how we make this actual change. We have all these best practices and how a little bit of how we can implement them, but a lot of this has to do with behavior change. And that's what I really focus on in organizations. So I do want to start with some of the examples I'm going to give because I'm going to walk through some scenarios. I'm not trying to generalize neurotypes, but I'm just trying to use them in there. So please take that into account as I speak to this. So what the major thing I think is preventing these best practices that the team here has shared is organizational, team, and social norms. Norms are things that just happen, but we really don't know why. They're automatic. When people join a new group, they're trying to adapt. So a lot of, people in the past have adapt it to these things. But for all people, it's not necessarily easy to do that. And it creates, a very taxing environment for a lot of individuals who don't pick up on all these things. So what do we do about it? So let's look at this. We talked about the organization, the team, and the social. So let's look at this from the team perspective. So first, once again, we have group norms. So for this example, and Larissa talked a lot about this, is how meetings are run and prepared for. So I had a client, it was a law firm, and they had a norm. When you walked into a meeting, they handed out legal documents, and participants would have 20 minutes to read and be ready to discuss. What we helped work with them during this time was asking why. Why are you doing this process? And of course, the answer usually is because this is how we've always done it. So we took the time to explain how exclusive this was to different learning styles. And then we had them examine it from different lenses. So I used an example of a dyslexic team member's experience and how difficult this was to try to read and write and do all this within that time frame and be a productive member of the team. People have working memory and processing speeds that they need to take maybe smaller bits of information and be able to form coherent and useful thoughts about it. Sometimes it does take time, as my peers here have mentioned. How about somebody with dyspraxia who may need more time to write notes and organize information? And, I'm dyspraxic and I need that. I need some time to kind of put it in pictures as I think about and pull it all together. Or you may have, some people who are autistic, they work best with front loading, what's going to be happening, what's expected of me. And if they come in these meetings and suddenly they're talking about a topic they're not familiar with, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And lastly, we talk about the quality responses for everybody in there. When you're doing that quickly in this one scenario, were they really getting the best from their team? So once again, we asked why. And once again, the answer was because this is what we've always done. So we said, how about we make this purposeful? Let's see how we can change this. So we worked to change the process to set up review time, note takers, and agendas for meetings. So review time is getting the materials beforehand, at least 24 hours, but some of these for the legal were a little bit more, I'd like to say, meaty, more content to them. So maybe longer time was needed. We also encouraged our client to provide note-taking apps, as many have talked about, like Otter AI. We did recognize that in some environments, this isn't okay. So with legal environments, there's some confidentiality or other things that they don't want transcribed. But in some situations, it's okay. So I do want to say that sometimes it's legally not okay for some of these things, but in general, there's a lot of uses that can still happen within organizations. So that's one example I wanted to share on how we can make those changes. So now this one's a little bit more difficult because it has to do with more of lots more informal things that happen in the workplace. You could call that like that social isolation piece. So one client I had a team norm of informally meeting up on Monday morning with their coffee and talking about their weekends and teasing one another about stuff and, creating these little inside jokes they make throughout the day. Was this a required event? Was it even an event? So no, but it became an unwritten rule that you join this bonding time, shared personal information, laughed with others, and basically had conversations with nothing to do about work. So then again, we asked why. The answer wasn't surprising: team building. What followed was a discussion about creating in-groups and out-groups. So in-groups are the groups with which an individual feels a sense of identity and loyalty, while out-groups are the groups to which they feel like they don't belong. So this is a social categorization. This social categorization can create a us versus them mentality, which can lead to in-group favoritism. So the people that are, having those discussions being liked more and getting more privileges than those that don't. So what happens is those that are part of the out-group feel disconnected, and they may have a hard time connecting with the teams when they're doing their actual work and needing to collaborate. So we talked to the managers in this about the exclusionary practice this was creating. And we did talk about how it was, especially to neurodivergent team members, but honestly, they really to apply to all, as a lot of things do. But a lot of people just don't confess neurotypical, neurodivergent because they're embarrassed. that this is making them comfortable. They don't feel good about it. So what we made them identify is people might think I work with you, but I really don't want to share my personal life. I have a family and I don't have a family, excuse me, and I can't share what others do. I don't do well with small talk and it makes me uncomfortable. And I can't tell when someone is teasing me or when to take it seriously. So my face doesn't always know how to react. It's stressful. And I question everything I do and think, exhausting me. This can cause people to mask their true selves and try to fit in or force the same behaviors by trying to camouflage into the group. And we know how much, and once again, my peers have talked about this can just drain our energy and lead to potentially mental health challenges and burnout. So how do we change this? That's the hard part. So after this discussion with the management, we had to ask them to make a very courageous decision, which is to stop a behavior. And everybody wants to fit in. So the manager having to change their behavior really is where everything starts. And we did this because we didn't want to make it weird, where it was like, we're stopping these meetings right now, because then those who don't participate probably would have got fingers pointed at them. And we don't want that to happen. We want this to naturally happen. So we did a slow but deliberate change in the behavior. So the line manager or the direct manager stopped participating. They got right down to work after some friendly good mornings. I hope you had a good weekend. They started doing work and going to those that sat down and did their work too, and verbally building them up for their focus to a task. The manager never said, stop doing this. They never chastised those who were still behaving that way. They just modeled better behavior. And over time, the behavior slowly changed. And in groups and out groups, the social isolation didn't start off the week. Didn't mean it didn't still happen, but it was a first step in changing some of these things. And once again, this is a way to show an example of how we can kind of make those changes. So that's why I really focus my work on that line manager, modeling these behaviors to make neuro-inclusive environments that do benefit everybody. Jess, how much more time do I have? Because I have some attendee questions I was going to try to go into.
Yeah, so actually really great. Our planning team, thank you all, have said for all of us panelists who are able to stay, that we can go into a little longer time for another like 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you want to share a couple more, Tiffany, I'll add on a few to you to wrap up the panel, and then let's start to address the Q&A questions.
Okay, so you want me to do them now, or do you want me to come back at the end?
Okay. How about I'll add in my tips and wrap us up,
Yeah.
and then you want to start us off in Q&A? That would be great.
That would be great.
Okay.
Go for it, Jess.
Thank you. Well, thank you for sharing a very tangible story, with us of the transformative work that you've done in understanding, right, some of the challenges that had come up and how you worked with the whole team, the manager, to address those. I think that's really helpful. I'm going to wrap up the presentation portion of the session with some practical steps to neuroinclusion of what managers and organizations can do. I think you all heard so many already, which is great. And I'm going to just summarize what everybody has already said here today of some of those practical steps to neuroinclusion. So first, I want to start with what Ben said, which I think was really around centering the voices of neurodivergent individuals. And that's in research, because so much of the practices and what we do is research led, and how important that is to do. Also, what I would encourage the employers, and I see some HR team members here, is if you have an employee resource group for people with disabilities or those that are neurodivergent, please go ask them, go to your ERGs and have them co-design with you a better accommodations process, hear from their experiences, and really listen well to what they're sharing. So center the voices of neurodivergent individuals, the nothing about us without us. Second practical step to take here is we heard a lot about the masking that so many neurodivergent individuals feel that they have to do to be accepted in the workplace, to be able to get through an interview, where so much is put on social skills and this burden of the social norms. Just very briefly here, picking up on social norms, as we've all talked about, is not something that easily comes to everybody. So just full stop, understanding that. So what are some of the things that helped? Structured networking. If we're going to do a group team meeting and we're networking or whatever that might be, have it be done in a structured way where maybe there's questions that we're all going to ask and discuss together. Make it known that that's what the icebreaker is going to be. Have it in a structured way, share it in advance so people know how to participate in that social activity. I also wrote down something we really work with employers to do of defining those social expectations and those norms in the workplace. I even noticed on our panel here, right? Sometimes we need off video time. I tell managers, especially later in the day when you are more taxed and more tired, like what a gift it is if you can give your team off video time or make it known which meetings require video time. Like I'm going to want to see everybody because we're going to talk about something important. When are there meetings where we can be off video and as a manager proactively saying, let's stay off video because I know the amount of toll it takes to be on video all the time or to be like socially presenting yourself all the time. So please define those social norms, understand the toll that it can take for many people to mask. Other practical tips that we talked about of accommodations and the challenges that we face. Make it safe for people to disclose and to ask for their needs. This is one of the trainings that we do with companies. The first question we ask, this is our manager training, is how would you describe how your mind works? Okay, if you do this, this is very difficult for many people to do. Unfortunately, what I've learned is that this is the burden that so many neurodivergent individuals have had their whole lives to get the supports they need in school, to get the supports they need at work. So please, first, try to describe how your mind works. It's not easy to do. So we can start to understand the burden that neurodivergent individuals face to then ask for the accommodations that they need. The plug here is you can bring in trainers like our team or others who bring this language to the workplace so that people don't have to disclose. They just have language and words to use to describe their minds in a way that everybody can understand. Where somebody shared before that someone needs processing, more time to process information, that having it in a written form is going to assist me to answer the question I'm hearing you ask me. Like that's a very simple shift that we can make if we just understand that that's why it helps people. It was brought up about assistive technologies and how great would it be if your accommodations team or process had a list. I call it a storefront. Here's what the company is ready to provide that is at no cost and easy to implement. Those assistive technology and tools that you were mentioning, Larissa, and what others I think have dropped into the chat here, that you should be able to get those and to access them. In the accommodations process, please work with the neurodivergent individual. Realize what they have risked to share with you and to feel safe to share with you about their diagnosis and their disclosure. When so oftentimes in so many people's lives, when they've shared, they've had negative experiences, as we've heard, and we want to stop that. Like, I can't, yeah, I get emotional about this because it's so important for us to create spaces where people can just share who they are and have someone respond with integrity and dignity. Okay, a couple more practical things here and then we'll get to the Q&A. In implementing universal design, so glad this is recorded, but the big ones that we have that are, I think, easy to access, built-in captions, AI note takers, provide predictability, be clear in expectations. I tell managers, ping with purpose. Don't say, hey, can we hop on a meeting? Okay, why? Well, what are we talking about? Like, can we hop into a meeting to talk about tomorrow's presentation. Okay, because for those 10 minutes or those 2 hours until you actually hop on the call, your employee is freaking out, like trying to figure out why we are getting on this meeting. Provide predictability. This is going to be good for all of your employees and especially those that are neurodivergent. Same with sending an agenda ahead of a meeting. It's the exact same thing. We want people to be prepared. No one performs well when they don't know what's expected of them. Same with interview questions, providing them in advance, having a written version of it, maybe even when they arrive to the interview. That's just going to help everyone perform at their best when they know what to expect. Communicate in multiple formats, provide time to prepare to discuss something, be clear, and assistive technologies that are very much available. Last things here, for all of the neurodivergent individuals that are on this call, I just want you to know and hear so loud and clear that you are not alone. I think there's so much community. I hear it from our panelists and I see it in the chat. Know that you're not alone, and we hate the experiences that so many of you have shared. But thank you for sharing them, because people like me, I'm someone who's neurotypical. I need to hear these stories. I need to know, and more people need to know so that we can design better workplaces for all of us. And how much I've learned from neurodivergent individuals that has just broadened my perspective and made me such a better person and have much better human connections with other people. So for all the employers that are here, I just thank you for listening to this panel and to all of our voices. I encourage you to not go this alone. There are partners like all of us, many of us on this call, to walk alongside you, and to help bring about some of these bring these practices to life. And if you don't know where to start, find us all on LinkedIn, which we've all dropped into the chat here. And I'm now going to hand back to Tiffany to walk us through some of the questions that came into the chat, and just thank you all for being here with us today.
Thanks, Jess. So I'm actually going to go through some that were submitted during sign up. So there was a lot about supporting an ND hire, and that was, thoroughly gone through by everybody here. But I do want to add just a couple things. So we're big believers of always doing check-ins, and it's like, whatever rhythm is best for everybody. But especially when someone's starting a team, when they're coming in, okay, how often can we check in to see how you're doing? Make sure you don't have questions. Are you getting what you need? We talk about accommodations, but when you start a job, you don't know what you need. You don't know what context things are going to be in. You don't know what kind of work. You don't know your coworkers. So by having these check-ins, you're having an opportunity to set up with your employees, especially your neurodivergent employees, opportunities to get the help and the resources they're going to need to do their best work. So if you're only doing it at the beginning, it's really sometimes not even the best way. It's always growing and changing based on, once again, the context. And as soon as that individual, if they're working in one team, especially like in professional services, and they move to another team, it starts all over again. So you need to have check-ins. Another thing, when you're having a new ND hire, as much as you do this with everybody, but more frequently, is debriefs. So if you go into a meeting or you go into some kind of working session, have that debrief right away afterwards. Make sure, you both understand the content the same. There's no questions. Maybe there's some things you need to discuss that happened that they don't know the history that came into that. But you're building them up. And most importantly, you're creating that psychologically safe environment for both you and your employee to make sure everybody's always getting what they want to do their best work. They need to do their best work, and understanding what they need to do their job efficiently. So that was one question that came in. I do want to add about the learning style. And Jessica brought up a good point in manager training about people really don't understand how they learn. We do now, because this is kind of what we focus on. But a lot of times what my team will do is, because we are researchers, is we'll do a learning style inventory, which is a validated instrument, but it allows people to answer questions about themselves and come back with how they learn best. And that will open a lot of managers' eyes to see, one, if they're working in a team, or excuse me, in a training maybe of like 10 people, to recognize how differently they all work and how they learn. And that really opens the conversation to recognize that this isn't just some thing that happens with, this group of individuals. We're all like that. And another question that came in, and I'll pass it off, is about the anxiety and workload. And it pushes them to the state of overwhelming. And Larissa talked about this one, but I want to talk more, since I'm an HR professional also, about, what does it look like when you do this? So when you start doing these things, you do need to go to HR. You need to make a formal request with HR confidentially about this. It's always good to talk to your manager, but sometimes that manager necessarily won't have what they need to be able to give you the support you need. You may need some break in time. The manager may not have authority to give that to you, but an HR representative you work with can. It came to the point where you need to take a leave of absence. That's something that HR will be able to help you with. Maybe you need to get some payment for that, some disability, losing my track of word, but payment for when you're out. HR can help you with that. So I encourage you to take that step to make sure you're protecting yourself when you're hitting these types of environments. Especially too is like EAP, which is employee assistance programs. They may have counselors where you can get some mental health support during these times. And the sooner you can catch yourself and use these resources, it keeps us from really hitting that bottom of that burnout. Once we see ourselves going in that trajectory, we need to jump in and get that help. And sometimes that's hard to do. So if we make ourselves more aware of these resources immediately when we start a company or at a company, then we can do more. So I'm going to pass it off to Jess to do other people. Those are just some things I really wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you so much for those practical steps. Always helpful. Does
Hey,
anybody,
Jess,
yeah, have a question?
it's Greer. We could take one more question and then we are going to break, just a little break before the next session.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone have a question? Yeah. I think I heard someone come off mute. Okay. I did see a question about, let me read the question here. Sydney, I think this was a question for you, but maybe any of our panelists who are prepared and want to share thoughts around employee resource groups. Is it helpful to be open about your label or your diagnosis in these workplaces? Can it be damaging? How important is it that a company buys into and has employee resource groups? If you could quickly provide some thoughts here, and then we hand back to
Yeah. So just very briefly, because I'm conscious of our time, I've been asked to speak to a lot of employee resource groups and neurodivergent or neurodiversity, accessibility, disability ERG groups. And for some reason, they're still the most underrepresented by us. And so I usually encourage, like there's a lot of parents that have neurodivergent children, children that have disabilities. And so they kind of pick over the groups, which is fine and should be included in the conversation. And so I really encourage to have our representation and making sure that people, don't have to specifically disclose that they have a disability or that they're neurodivergent, but just disclose that they identify with that, to have and understand that representation matters in these spaces and have our lived experience be really at the forefront in driving these employee resource groups and really recognizing that it should be 50%. I think a lot of other employee resource groups really like, okay, I'm gonna have at least 50% of people from that employee resource group that identify from that group. But for some reason, when it comes to this, there's a disconnect. And so really having that representation matters. And I think there's ways of actually really building out that employee resource group to allow other people in the organization and to really build a sense of community in organizations through these employee resource groups and really create more internal resources and connections and bringing in external resources to really help us thrive at work and to really recognize that it helps us feel less alone when we're part of these employee resource groups and allow for really understanding what is the purpose of this employee resource group and really collectively coming up with what does this employee resource group look like for us and in these organizations. And so I think that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. Yes, the representation is so key there, to be part of that design. So, an input. Thank you. I know we have other questions in the chat, but I think I need to hand back to Greer, and just thank you everyone for being here with us today.
Thanks, everyone.